All right, today we're going to dive into what you could call one of the biggest identity thefts of all time. I'm not kidding. We're talking about a crime, really, that's been hidden in plain sight for centuries. It involves one single name, a name that shows up almost 7,000 times in the original scriptures, but somehow it's been all but erased.
And it really all kicks off with this incredibly powerful statement right here from the book of Isaiah. I mean, listen to how direct this is. I am Jehovah, that is my name. There's no wiggle room there, right? It's a personal introduction, crystal clear. He's not just giving us a title, he's giving his actual personal name and says, hey, my glory is attached to this name.
So, that just begs the question, right? If God made it so incredibly clear what his name is, why don't most people know it? I mean, how did this personal, unique name become such a mystery? Well, that's exactly what we're going to get into. Which brings us to our first part, a cosmic identity theft. And yeah, that sounds dramatic, but the sources we're looking at don't see this as some minor translation issue. They call it what it is, a massive identity theft. It's a huge claim for sure, so let's actually look at the evidence.
Okay, so here's the absolute core of the issue. The word that most of us are used to hearing for God, Lord. Well, it's not a name, it's a title. Just like president or queen or captain. It tells you someone's position, it shows they have authority, but it doesn't tell you who they are. And if you look through the scriptures, you'll see just how generic this title Lord really is. I mean, it was used for kings and nobles, sure. Sarah even called her husband Abraham Lord. It was a common term for masters. But here's the real kicker. Even false gods, like Baal, were called Lord. So when you just say Lord, which one are you even talking about? It's a generic label, not a one-of-a-kind name. So, on to our next section, the 7,000 missing clues, and that number is not an exaggeration. We are not talking about a handful of cases here, we're talking about thousands, literally thousands of clues that were intentionally stripped from the text. Just look at that number, nearly 7,000 times. That is absolutely staggering. In the original ancient Hebrew manuscripts, God's personal name, which is represented by these 4 Hebrew letters, YHWH, and is often pronounced in English as Jehovah, it appears almost 7,000 times. To put that in perspective, it was one of the most common words in the entire Hebrew Bible.
So you have to understand, this wasn't some kind of accident. It wasn't a slip-up in translation. All the evidence points to one thing, a deliberate, systematic choice to substitute God's personal name, YHW, with the generic title, Lord. You've probably even seen this in your own Bible. You know where Lord is spelled out in all capital letters? Well, that's often a clue from the translators showing you exactly where they took out the name Jehovah and put in the title Lord instead. I mean, think about this in modern terms for a second. If this happened today, what would we call it? Legally, it would be massive-scale identity theft, for one. It's also kind of like trademark dilution, taking a unique brand name and making it generic. And you could even argue it's a form of cultural forgery, since it fundamentally changes such a sacred and ancient text.
Okay, so our investigation now leads us to the motive, a motive of misguided piety. Because if this was done on purpose, you have to ask, why? What could possibly be the reason for taking God's name out of his own book? It seems crazy, right?
Well, the motive, it turns out, wasn't malicious. It came from a human tradition that started up much later. It was this idea that God's name was just too holy, too sacred to even be spoken out loud by imperfect people, because they were terrified of accidentally disrespecting it or using it in vain.
And what this did was create a major conflict, a real clash. On one hand, you have God's own word, like in Psalm 9:10, which says that knowing his name is the key to trusting in him. But then, on the other hand, you have this human tradition that comes along and says, nope, let's do the exact opposite. Let's hide the name so no one can use it.
All right, next up, the widespread consequences. Because a decision this big, well, it was bound to have some serious ripple effects. Let's dig into some of the collateral damage this identity theft caused.
Okay, for a perfect example of this, let's go to that epic showdown on Mount Carmel. You've got the prophet Elijah on one side and hundreds of prophets of Baal on the other. And for hours and hours, what are they doing? They're crying out to their God, Lord Baal.
Now, just imagine for a second if Elijah had gotten up and just prayed, answer me, O Lord. Well, who's Lord? Baal was a lord. It would have been totally confusing, totally ambiguous. But of course, he didn't do that. He was specific. He called on the personal name. He prayed, answer me, O Jehovah. And boom, That specificity, that clarity, is what brought down the fire from heaven and showed everyone who the one true God was.
And this whole thing reveals a really weird double standard when you think about it. We have absolutely no problem saying ancient names like Elijah, right? But guess what that name means? My God is Jah, and Jah is just a short form of Jehovah. Or what about Jehoshaphat? That means Jehovah has judged. And even the name of Jesus itself comes from Hebrew that means Jehovah is salvation. So isn't it strange we keep all these names that contain God's name, but we erase the actual name they're pointing to? It just doesn't add up. And hey, don't think this is just some Old Testament trivia. It goes right to the heart of Jesus' own mission. In his famous prayer in John chapter 17, what does he say he did? I have made your name known. He didn't say I made your title known. He said he came to reveal the Father's personal name. That was central to his whole purpose.
This all leads us to our final section, restoring a stolen name. So after looking at all this evidence, what's the verdict? What's the takeaway here? Well, according to the sources we're examining, the conclusion is simple. It's time to restore the name that was taken. And this isn't just about being historically correct or winning a debate, you know? Restoring God's name really matters. Why? Well, first, it makes it clear that God is unique. He's not just one of the many lords out there. It completely gets rid of that confusing ambiguity we talked about. It also lines up perfectly with what Jesus came to do. And finally, it's how we actually fulfill that prayer to hallow God's name. You know, to treat it as sacred and set it apart from all others.
You know, it's pretty ironic when you think about it. We live in an age where we are obsessed with protecting our identities, right? We've got complex passwords, fingerprint scanners, two-factor authentication for everything. We guard our identity with our lives. And yet, somehow, we've let the single most important name in the entire universe be pushed aside and forgotten. Because in the end, after all the history and all the tradition, it really just comes back to this one simple, powerful statement from God himself. It's his own declaration, his personal introduction to us. There's no debate here. I am Jehovah, that is my name. And that leaves us with a final, pretty powerful question to think about. It kind of shifts things from just history and facts to something a bit more personal, doesn't it? After seeing everything, you have to ask yourself, if God's name really was stolen, and if we're the ones who know about it, if we don't stand up for it, who will?